Yes, good morning. Greg Channon is my name. I'm the Chief Geologist for Elixir Energy, based in Perth, Australia. Elixir has three assets around the world. Firstly, two assets in Mongolia, a coal seam gas asset in the Gobi Desert. Secondly, a hydrogen project also in the Gobi Desert. And thirdly, a gas project in Queensland, Australia.
Greg, thank you very much for the introduction. Good to see you again. It's been a while. I think the last time I spoke to you was Australia was still in the grip of the pandemic. Well, the world was, but Western Australia was still had its travel ban. So how have you been?
Well, look, really good, thank you, Merlin. It was great to get out of that lockdown, as you say. I must say that Perth was unique in the world in that we locked everybody out of our state rather than our homes, and so the lockdown that within Perth itself was quite modest. But of course, you couldn't move outside the state for many, many, many months. So now it's good to be back on the road. I've already been to Mongolia multiple times, and we're making progress again.
Good. Now, I will come on to Mongolia, but I noticed that in your corporate presentation, you very much lead with the Grandis Gas project in Queensland, just west of Brisbane. So, you're the chief geologist. You must have had some input in the decision on the kind of geological prospectivity. Could you tell me about your relationship with the project? When did you kind of get involved with it, and what was your input in the selection process?
Yeah, look, certainly, Merlin. Now, look, southwest Queensland is a place that I'm pretty familiar with. So I cut my teeth as a well site geologist in the Cooper Basin and the Surat Basins some 35 years ago. And it's an area that I've known pretty well. And look, it's interesting how as time's gone by, a lot of areas get explored and yet others get left behind. And the Taroom Trough in southwest Queensland, which is in the Bowen Surat Basin, is an area that hasn't been deeply explored. And over the last 5 or 6 years, I've been noticing that there's been more and more activity, and we've had a couple of tries at getting acreage here. And then in 2022, we were able to scoop up this block on the western flank of the Taroom Trough, and we're pretty excited to have that. It is has excellent prospectivity, and it was a extensive team effort which guided Elixir to bring this into their portfolio.
Just for my benefit, because I'm a noob to the geology of the area. So the Bowen Basin is, I've heard of the Bowen Basin. That's and that's in Queensland. And you spoke about the Cooper Basin and the Surat Basin and the Taroom Trough. How do those four entities kind of relate to each other? And is it all gas production?
Well, we're focused on gas production, and these areas are mostly gas, but there is certainly oil production throughout that central region. So, look, in Queensland, the key central basin is called the Surat-Bowen Basin. The Surat Basin is the Triassic sediments and younger, and the Bowen Basin is the Permian sediments and older. Now, in this area, of course, you've had small gas fields producing for many decades, particularly in the Bowen Basin. And most recently, of course, the Surat Basin is famous for its CBM deposits, which have occurred really in the last 10 years. And so we're focused on the Permian sediments, which are down deep, and we're looking at a particular play type, which is completely unexplored in this region. And that's the what we call the tight gas, or what I'll refer to as the basin-centered gas play. Now, this is an unconventional gas play.
So the basin-centered, or the basin...
Basin-centered gas play.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so that's an unconventional gas trap, which has been proven already in the Taroom Trough. And look, as simply as I can put it, the gas is expelled from the coals, and that's well known. It's the key source rocks of the greater region. And the coals are expelling gas at greater rates than it can escape and migrate into the structures that are all around the region. And so it leaves the centre of the basin overpressured and with gas trapped within it in a more of an unconventional rather than a structural trap.
When
So this type of play is very common in the US, and but really hasn't been explored extensively in Australia as yet.
When I hear a structural trap, I think of a sediment up against a kind of a fold or possibly an anticline, some kind of domal feature. If the gas isn't in a structural trap, what is it in?
Okay, well, it still remains inside the reservoirs, and they're held in basically hydrodynamically. The pressure surrounding the rocks is keeping the gas in place, and it's when we drill the wells through it and we fracture stimulate them, so the gas flows. And so these unconventional plays are, of course, very common in the US, and the typical shale play is an example of a unconventional deposit. You've heard of the Eagleford and these types of plays. Well, this is similar to that. It's not an Eagleford style play, but basin-centered gas is well known throughout the US, and it has been explored previously in Australia in the Nappermerry Trough some 10 years ago. And we're sort of picking up on that information and really pushing it forward into the 2023.
So the shale gas explosion in the US, and this miracle of fracking and the new gas production, is essentially what you're looking to replicate here.
Yes, but in a slightly different play type. So we're looking not in actually shales at all. We're looking in the sandstones and the coals, and that's the real key. So in the past, this has been looked at in the Cooper Basin, in the Nappermerry Trough. Santos and a lot of international oil and gas companies were exploring for this. And when you look at this play, there are some key issues that you're looking for. Number one is, how deep is it? And you've got to have it at a reasonable depth, but not too deep. Secondly, temperature is critically important. You can't have it too hot. Thirdly, pressure. Absolutely critical that you have some overpressure, but not too much. And then finally, the stress regime is fundamental. If the stress regime is not oriented correctly, then everything won't work. And look, what we've noticed, this is a little bit technical, but look, what we've noticed is that back in the Cooper Basin, there were some significant differences to what we're looking at in the Taroom Trough. And we see the Taroom Trough as being absolutely unique in Australia in terms of its potential for this type of play. And we've got neighbours around us who are actively working on it now. QGC, who of course are now owned by Shell, they've explored this area extensively and are active, as are Santos and also smaller players.
When you, in this list of those four criteria, you mentioned depth and pressure, but surely that they equate to the same thing, possibly with an impact of the stress regime. But so what's your ideal depth that you're looking at? What's the optimum depth? And also that's also, with the geothermal gradient now, temperature will play a role as well. So there has to be in your geothermal environment that you are in the Bowen Basin or the Taroom Trough, there'll be a kind of a sweet spot in terms of depth, and that's where you want your sandstones and your coals to be in. What depth is that?
Yeah, so that depth would it can be as probably in our block, it's about 3,700 metres to about 4,300 metres. And look, you mentioned pressure. Look, obviously, a normal pressure gradient is represented by the hydrostatic gradient, which is simply the water on top of the rock. But of course, in this part of the world, it's overpressured. And so the overpressuring assists with our ability to produce it, because you get additional pressure associated with the introduction of source rock gas, and then secondly, as you mentioned, Merlin, the stress regime. And of course, the stress regime present day in this part of the world is generally strike slip. And what we've been doing in our analysis in Elixir is we built some mechanical earth models which took into account all those factors that I've just mentioned and the ones you've just raised. And they're quite complex software, but we've built them ourselves, and we've identified that some of the coals within the section are not either compressive or strike slip stress regimes, but in fact normal. And a normal stress regime is ideal. So we have a normal stress regime coal that is fractured and associated with an overpressured petroleum system, we think is going to be the key to commercial production for the first time in this area.
So you effectively, in your 1,000-kilometer block, and within your, I mean, you've got in your 3C number, you've got almost 1,500 BCF of kind of target resource. And are you saying that within that you can map areas where you can model areas where there's a normal stress regime, which will be your priority targets?
Yes, and though it's not so much aerially as it is vertically, actually. Some of the vertical stratigraphy is normally pressured, whereas some of it is in strike slip, and that is the absolute key.
So, and how do you pick that out with seismics? I mean, do you kind of try and identify?
Yes, we do. We use seismic, and we also use well logs from the existing penetrations. Now, it's probably worth mentioning that surrounding the block, wells have been drilled by QGC going back about a decade ago. And those wells are in the public domain now. And each one of those wells intersected a gas target and produced gas. The largest rate, I believe, was about 3.5 million cubic feet per day from Daydream 1. However, that was an instantaneous rate, not a sustained rate. But that's the headline number that is in the records from the government where QGC lodged their information. And so it's our challenge to try and get those sorts of rates on a sustained basis rather than an instantaneous basis. Bear in mind that our first well, which will be called Daydream 2, is actually only a couple of kilometres away from Daydream 1, which is further to the west, just outside our block.
And do you envisage importing the kind of the fracking skills and the technique from the US, or maybe it already exists in Australia? And I guess the question is this going to be kind of a frack play?
Well, look, there will be fracture stimulation involved. I think that's almost certain at this stage. In terms of the technology, it's going to be a combination. Look, we will use the US base as a start because, of course, their expertise there, and they've been doing it for many years. But we're going to be doing some quite different techniques, actually, in terms of the types of frack we're going to use and also the way we're going to complete these wells and the way we're going to produce them. And in fact, there's going to be quite a research and development component to this. We're going to be doing things in this well at Daydream 2, which have never been done in Australia before.
Can you give me some examples of kind of the way that you're?
Well, I'll give you one very specific one, and that's around the when we do fracture stimulate, we're going to be using a micro proppant. So when normally you fracture around the world, and look, in Australia, fracking in the Cooper Basin and in parts of Queensland has been going on for I think 50 years almost. Actually, there's nothing new about it. It's a safe technology. It's done in very deep rocks, as are these. There's no issues with the surface whatsoever. And normally, when you push fluid into the rocks, you use a proppant, which is typically a sand or some sort of spherical ball, if you like, that's a very small size, to keep those fractures open. And what we've seen from our research is that you can use micro-sized proppants, which are literally grains the size of flour, so very, very small, to start seeding these fracks. And it's been very effective, particularly in coals. And so that's something that has never been done before in Australia, using a micro proppant to frack open a coal seam. And we think this could be the key to opening up the productivity in this part of the Taroom Trough.
Now, obviously, drilling a 4-kilometer or thereabouts, plus or minus 10%, kind of a 4-kilometer well, and fracking it is quite a thing, isn't it? I mean, it's going to take a bit of time to do and to design and to carry out and then to test. Can you just give me some indication of the process for designing that, how much time you expect and when you can ideally expect results from it?
Sure. Well, look, the design is well underway, actually. And in terms of 4-kilometer wells, look, they're routinely drilled in Australia these days. I think you can look to wells being drilled in Northern Territory at the moment, which are also fracked. I believe they're reasonably deep. In the Cooper Basin, 4-kilometre wells are drilled relatively commonly. In terms of the fracking, certainly at the moment, most of the deep fracking that's going on in Australia is either in the Cooper Basin or up in the Northern Territory. Of course, there's been a lot of that written about in recent times in Australia. And so it's not that complex. It will take, 6 months or so to get everything in order, but it's not really that big an issue. Look, with respect to the drilling, we would probably say somewhere between 30 and 40 days it would take to drill a well of that depth. I don't think it's particularly complex. And also I might add that there are multiple wells, or rigs I should say, that are currently literally 50 or 100 kilometres away from our block, which are available for use probably later in the year. So the timing is actually perfect to trial this type of operation.
So it gives you 9 months to get the planning done. Ideally, find a partner, because that's one of the key things, is that you're not going to do this by yourself. You're going to look for some kind of farm out relationship.
Yeah, look, we're looking at a number of different ways to get this funded. Look, we do have the funding to drill it on our own, but I think Neil and the board have advised me that they're open to any suggestions, any innovative suggestions on how we might get some assistance to go through that. It's always best to share the risk with other parties, and look, we're talking to a number of groups at the moment.
And when you talk about kind of the geological risk on this, on the drill, you've mentioned a couple of kind of this will be the first time, a few firsts. What gives you the comfort that this is that this is a substantially de-risked project, or a target? Because lots of innovation, in my mind, kind of equals risk, but you seem pretty relaxed.
Well, certainly, because we already know the gas is there. So there is one risk that we're facing, and that is, can we get the well to flow at a commercial rate? So as I just mentioned previously, there is gas in every direction already discovered in this play. So the play is proven without any doubt, and that's why ERCE, who are our independent reserve auditors, gave us some 400 BCF of contingent resource. So that resource is already there. That's only in the sands. So that is kind of ready to be produced. All we've got to work out is how we will break open the sandstones to get it going. And then, of course, the other part of it is the coals. Now, the coals have never been done before, so that's why that's a prospective resource of some 1.5 TCF. So there's almost 2 TCF in total, split between the coals and the sandstones. So we know that the gas is present because it's been logged and tested in wells surrounding our block. There's no debate that the gas is present. The challenge is how to get it out. And so, first of all, we sit down and we sort of brainstormed where the best reservoirs would be, which is why we identified those fractured coals that are abnormally stressed. And then we built some what we call dynamic models, where we basically input all the parameters which are all known because they're in well bores that are within a couple of kilometres away from us. And we built a dynamic model, and then we stimulated it. We drilled it and stimulated it on the computer and identified that we could indeed get commercial rates from it. So we kind of have the computer evidence that this will work. And we see it as an appraisal opportunity, not an exploration opportunity on that basis.
Okay. I'm completely unfamiliar with this process of doing a dynamic model and stimulating it through computer modeling and giving you comfort that this is kind of an appraisal process. Is that something that's been? Is that a conventional modeling tool that has been proven in other areas?
Oh, look, most certainly. Around the world, dynamic modelling is fundamental with all oil field developments, actually. Look, you might have heard of the Petrel software. I mean, that's a one example. We use different types of modelling software, and look, it's actually quite common. In fact, every fracture stimulation that would go on in the world would be modelled prior to it going on to ensure that you get your desired result. So, in fact, it's really a very common procedure. What's, I think, important is the recognition of the mechanical Earth model, which is unique and, I guess, bespoke to what Elixir have been doing. When we feed that into our dynamic model, we get a significantly different result to if you'd just been, look, we always just use the default, if you like, Merlin. You know how computer models work. Use the defaults, get the standard answer, but we certainly did go down that road.
Thank you. Just going back to the 500 BCF of contingent resource in the sandstones and the 1.5 TCF of prognostic resource in the coal. Is that a function of there is 3 times the amount of vertical thickness in the coals, or is it 3 times more productive, or is the sandstone 3 times the aerial extent? So what's the relationship geometrically and between the sandstones and the coals, please?
Well, actually, Merlin, it's a combination of all 3, actually. I couldn't really say it was one or the other. It's volumetrically guided, both vertically and horizontally, and also relates to the confidence of how far you see the coals going. So it's not easy to explain. It's calculated volumetrically, but at the end of the day, look, I might say that by the time we're successful in our coal appraisal, it'll probably be about 50-50. But at the moment, there's more prospective resource than there is contingent.
Okay, good. And when you put that Daydream 2 well down, you will be going through the sandstone presumably first, and then the coal underneath. Is that correct? And you'll be hitting both targets.
Oh, absolutely. And they are they are interbedded, so there'll be multiple examples of each. Coal and sand.
Good, and that whole package will sit within that 3.7 to 4.3 kind of depth window.
Yeah, I think you're right. That is about the sweet spot. Any shallower than that, and of course you risk in our area, specifically in our area, you do risk the gas not being trapped and leaking off. And any deeper, and the permeability gets really too small, and you can't flow it. But and that can change. That's specific to our area, and that can change from area to area. And
you also mentioned temperature as being a kind of a constraining factor, so perhaps it can get too hot if it goes any deeper.
Well, exactly, and of course, what we've found is that the geothermal gradient or the temperature gradient in this area is quite modest compared to other areas like the Napperberry Trough. So there are a lot of reasons, like I've mentioned earlier, with respect to temperature. Also, CO2 is another issue as well. That back in the Napperberry Trough, CO2 was present in quite significant quantities, and it was very hot and difficult, too high pressure to frack. Whereas in the Taroom Trough, the temperatures are right. We think the depth is at the right location. The stresses appear to be more reasonable, and from all the records we've seen, very little, if any, CO2, which is a great thing.
Now, I know it's not a kind of a geological question, but the federal government has kind of thrown a spanner in the works in eastern Australia on the gas extraction. They're putting in a whole load of parameters. Can you just give me a quick update on that, please?
Yes, well, certainly. The timing's not great on the government, getting involved in our business on the east coast of Australia. Look, the reality is they've announced that they will put a cap on the price of gas in the domestic market, and that price actually is not unreasonable. I believe it was $13, which actually there's no issue with that at the moment. Now, I guess moving forward to the future, though, what people are worried about on the east coast of Australia is not the price, but the supply, and the supply is looking troubled. And we've had several organisations AEMO and a few others coming out and saying, look, there's potential for a real gas crunch coming and that we need more gas supply. So we feel that this gas, which of course is can be quickly brought on because it's only 35 kilometres from the MMbbl gas hub. So that's the main gas hub, one of the main gas hubs in southwest Queensland. And this gas, when we do bring it on, has both the potential to be brought in domestically into the East Coast, but also it can reach international markets via Gladstone. And so this gas doesn't have any domestic reservation associated with it, and so it will be available for domestic or international sales.
So if the international price is a lot better than the capped federal price, that you would just drive the gas off, it would be driven offshore.
Well, look, I mean that would be the assumption, unless of course the government decides that's not the case. But at this, we're awaiting the guidelines, which I believe are coming out in May or June. But I mean, Merlin, look, the strong view from producers on the east coast of Australia is that there's more work to be done in producing more gas, and Australia needs more gas, full stop, as a transition fuel, without any doubt whatsoever. So, look, I think the gas prices as quoted is certainly not something that is restrictive to us. We can certainly work within that, and you have both markets available to us. So we think that there won't be any issues in bringing this forward.
And can you get to the international markets through the MMbbl gas hub?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, and what's the spot price at the moment?
Oh, actually, look, that's probably one step too far. I mean, I was going to say maybe it's $12 or $13 US, but look, to be honest, I don't know this week. If you knew, I mean, I was trying to understand where that price cap came from. Is it kind of saying let's keep things steady at the moment, or was it just some far dated price which is well above the market? But no worries. Now, Mongolia, we mustn't forget Mongolia. We've been speaking for about 25 minutes about Australia, but I like the fact that you've made kind of quick progress in Mongolia on the coal bed methane there, the coal seam gas. You've run a pilot test. You've got some work programs. In the presentation, you talk about kind of what you're going to be doing in 2023. Perhaps you could just kind of quickly summarize the pilot testing and what you're planning to do this year. Yeah, look, certainly. So, look, I guess what we're particularly proud about in Mongolia is that we have, even through COVID, we've maintained strong work programs and delivered on providing a pilot test over the first coal seam gas project in Mongolia. And so, throughout COVID, we've had to work like this on Zoom. I can tell you that at some stages we had Zoom meetings on the rig floor with drillers conversing on which knobs to change and which dials to change to make sure that we were operating properly with regard to our testing and our logging. And that's enabled us to drill two very significant pilot wells. We call them Nomgon 8 and Nomgon 9. We spudded them in, I think it was November last year. And by December, we had them both online for a pilot gas project. Now, in CBM gas pilots, of course, you produce the water first, and then as the water produces, so you lower the hydrostatic head, you lower the pressure in the coal reservoir, and the gas is dissolved. And what we noticed in our project is that the gas flowed from day one, albeit at low rates. It's flowed at day one, and then as we continued to flow as we continued to flow the water, so the gas rates increased, relatively steady up to a sort of a maximum rate of around 200,000 cubic feet per day. And throughout that time, the water rate remained reasonably steady at about 150 barrels of water per day. So a couple of things to note from that outcome is, firstly, look, 200,000 might not seem like 10 million cubic feet a day, but these are unconventional CBM wells which we can drill and produce in literally almost a pattern program over many kilometres. And of course, in Mongolia, we have a pretty low cost base for drilling. And so, we think that we're on the cusp of something that's truly commercial on that basis. Look, secondly, of course, we're in a desert. It's a high altitude desert in Mongolia, and water is a significant issue, as it is in the Cooper Basin and other parts of Australia. And so it was a relief to us that the water wasn't flowing at extreme rates, which would require us to have to deal with it, either pump it down or have some other use for it. And of course, what we don't want to do is waste a valuable resource like water. So at 150 barrels a day, the rate is not so significant that it's a big issue. And then thirdly, although our initial tests showed that the water was, brackish and probably not suitable for either stock or for watering, it's cleaned up slightly over that period, and now it's at the brink of being usable for some stock. So it could have a use in its own right. So really, we're really pleased with the way the test has gone. There's been a lot of fine tuning. We've had to work it over. We take out pumps, we change it with other pumps, we shut it in, we try different rates. There's a lot of experimentation, a lot of data which has been acquired, but we're just really very pleased that we could flow what I believe is the first CBM gas flare in Mongolia.
Great. Well, and congratulations on the technical successes this far. What happens now? What are you looking to do in the course of 2023?
Okay. Well, the production pilot will run for probably another 2 months, where we'll finalise and gather as much data as we can. Then that will be shut down. And this year we're looking at a program of 9 wells. There will be 5 exploration wells, which will continue to range over the whole block, looking at other deposits to try and increase our contingent resource. And we'll also be having 4 what we call appraisal wells, which are going to be drilled in close to the Nomgon, Big Slope, Yangir region, where we think that is going to be our next discovery, and the next place we'll probably do a pilot in the coming years.
Sorry. Those 4 appraisal wells, are they around? Is that building out the pattern on Nomgon 8 and 9, or is it?
They're on trend, I'd say. I wouldn't say so much as a pattern. There are kind of 2 key areas where we're going after Nomgon. One is called Big Slope, and the other is called Yangir. Now they're on the same trend or line, if you like, and there's probably about almost 100 kilometres from the one side of Nomgon to the other end of Yangir. And so we're using the appraisal wells to drill more in that area and acquire more information on gas content and permeability, which will help us to increase our contingent resource over what's been a pretty successful program so far.
Remind me what your contingent resources are in Mongolia.
Oh, okay. So the contingent resource is very modest because we only did it over the Nomgon discovery itself, which was literally only over a few kilometres. I think it's of the order of 20 or 30 BCF in the middle case.
Okay. And what we come with your technical head on? What drives value here? Is it growing your commercial resource, your contingent resource? Are the exploration wells, if they can? And the appraisal wells, if you can kind of grow your contingent resource from 20 to 30 BCF into the hundreds, is that a game changer for this project, or is it more down the kind of the flow rates from the pilot testing?
No. In the first instance, it's definitely the contingent resource. The appraisal wells will immediately extend the contingent resource and drive it into a significantly larger number. And to have a contingent resource for a coal seam gas deposit in Mongolia, you need 2 things. Number 1, you need a desorb test which proves that the gas is present, and you need some sort of test or injectivity test or drill stem test which shows you have adequate permeability. And so where you have both of those present, then you can book a contingent resource. And so we booked our contingent resource very early on, where we only had that information over extremely small area, because when we first made our discovery at Nomgon, all we had was a small valley to work in, and so we moved in and did that rather quickly. And then we've since spread out over a much larger area, but we haven't returned to get the contingent resource enlarged. And to do that, we're building up our IFOT and permeability data set. And we're hoping that this year that will be completed and enable us to give a very significantly larger contingent resource. Beyond that, of course, the exploration wells will then identify new trends like that one, and that's how we kind of build up to be frankly, a significant and world-class resource.
Would you say IFOT, is that the desorption test?
No, so IFOT stands for Injectivity Fall Off test. And so if you've heard of a drill stem test, that's where you extract fluid from the wellbore. With an injectivity test, you inject fluid into the wellbore and you watch to see how the pressure relaxes. And as the pressure relaxes, so we can interpret the permeability and therefore the ability of the wells to flow via the cleating and the fracturing.
Okay, thank you. And when you talk about kind of a coal bed methane resource being, world class or significant, what figures do you have in your mind? Particularly for I'm new to this, so what sticks out as being good?
Oh, look, I think that a world-class resource would be measured in trillions of cubic feet or a TCF. But by the time you've got hundreds of BCF, you're certainly significant without any doubt. And look, I think without talking about the other players, of course, when we started, we were the only guys in the Gobi Basin. Now we've got sort of people to the left and people to the right, and we're all kind of heading towards TCF style contingent resource. I think that's where this play is heading. Good.
Well, good luck. In terms of the news flow, it feels as if there's going to be more coming out of Mongolia than out of Australia, or is that, or am I wrong? Will you be able to kind of generate news flow in the run up to the potential spud at Daydream 2?
Yeah, look, I'll probably suggest it's about 50-50 actually, Merlin. I mean, you've got certainly we'll have drilling results. We've had the close of the pilot. There'll be activity pretty steady in Mongolia, as there is every year. The drilling will start literally within a few weeks. We always shut down over the winter period. It gets pretty harsh in Mongolia there. I mean, we're talking minus 20 degrees. Last well we drilled, I was running an IFOT test, which is an injectivity test of actually literally water into the formation, and we had a cold snap. I was on the well site, and all the water valves froze, and we got hot water, we got heaters, but in minus 20 or minus 30 it's pretty tough. So look, we try and shut down over the winter period. We'll be starting up in the next month. That's going to be pretty active. In terms of Queensland though, look, there's quite a lot of information that's going to be coming through. We've got a lot of activity still going on with respect to what we're doing on our planning and the research we're doing on our program, so that's exciting. There's a lot of activity surrounding the blocks in Queensland. Actually, I know that there's drilling going on both east and west, so there'll be key data points which we'll be bringing into our program. And then before too long, we'll start ordering the long lead items, putting formal planning in place, securing the rig, etc., etc.
Greg, thank you very much for the update. It's been fascinating hearing what's been going on in the last few years and hearing the latest from the coal face.
Coal face, that's exactly what it was. Okay, well, Merlin, it's a pleasure to speak to you as always.